Hello, this is the Overcoming Resistance podcast, and I'm your host, Louis Carell. We do certainly apologize about not having an episode out last week. Some big life events had been going on with engagements, birthdays, lots of fun celebrations, and even unfortunately a head cold. So we appreciate your understanding. We plan to get back on schedule. Today we have another solo episode where I will be reviewing some topics related to psychology and expectation and how that can really influence a lot of our results in training and our results in life. So I hope you appreciate this episode and thank you for listening. Hello, everyone. Welcome back for another episode. I do apologize if I sound a little off. I'm recovering from a head cold, which, if you listen to the intro, did play a role in having this episode come out slightly delayed in terms of time. But I wanted to bring you guys a topic that I feel isn't talked about enough, but very important when it comes to new trainees, intermediate, and advanced trainees. And it's really the idea that what we expect to get from our training does influence heavily our results. And, we can even go so far as to not even just say training, but also what we expect from our diet, what we expect from our sleep, and these other big domains that influence our overall body composition, the results we get, and really, in a way, how we feel and maybe even how our overall life is impacted, right? Because exercise and what it can do for your health and your mind and can really influence maybe your how you feel in day-to-day life. Of course, your diet can influence your longevity, your health, and then also how we sleep influences how we feel day to day. So it's definitely, this is a podcast focused on training and nutrition, getting results there. But these topics can influence other areas, and generally as an idea topic, it can influence other areas. So, diving right in, I kind of wanted to start off with sleep, and we'll move on from there. So something I always found personally interesting was, the idea of improving sleep quality. There's a lot of topics and conversations coming out about how important sleep quality is, maybe even more so than just sleep duration. So quality of sleep is basically how good is the sleep, how restful, are you hitting the different stages of sleep? Are you getting adequate amounts of those? Maybe being somewhat more important, at least comparatively to just duration. Because, if your sleep quality is really bad, you can look at research on sleep apnea for this. Even if you're sleeping 9 to 10 hours every night, which is a long time, and for normal healthy people, you may find that usually like anywhere from 6 to 8 is pretty common for people to feel pretty good and report feeling well duration wise. You'd think, well, man, if I got 9 to 10, I'd probably feel amazing. But those with sleep apnea, their quality is so bad because they're getting interrupted because they're waking up from the lack of breathing and the oxygen, that they're, even if they sleep 9 to 10, they still feel really exhausted and have a lot of objective markers of sleep deprivation. So the quality, a lot of people have been talking about being super important. And I'm not going to spend time going into all the details on how we might be able to improve sleep quality, some of those lifestyle factors. But what I always found interesting was that, and having seen people in my own life, close family, friends, and even previous clients, where even if you start to correct for some of these behavioral things that are supposed to, based on the research and how most people respond, improve subjective sleep quality, right? How you feel in the morning. Do you feel rested? Do you feel energized? Do you feel good day to day? It doesn't always result in that, even going so far as, some people thinking that they have like insomnia and other things. And there's a line of research that, what do you do for people who don't necessarily, they don't have trouble falling asleep. They can sleep an adequate amount of time. and they've behaviorally done a lot for their sleep quality metrics, but yet they still don't feel very rested. And what I found interesting is that a lot of researchers actually start to point towards maybe starting to work on people's expectation of what sleep is going to do for them. And some of this comes from the fact that when they look at people who report poor sleep or insomnia, in some of the data, and I'll link some data below in the show notes if people are interested. But they find that when they look at objective measures, like say they're doing sleep studies, for example, and they're looking at these objective measures of sleep quality, they're pretty much the same as people who report being good sleepers. So then you're like, well, we can't find any objective reason for them to be reporting not feeling so good. And then when they do more subjective questionnaires of various types, they start to find that those who report poor sleep, they have maybe some expectations around not sleeping well, so they don't expect to sleep well. So that influences maybe to some degree how they feel when they wake up. Like there's almost like they don't expect to wake up feeling well, so they're not going to wake up feeling well, regardless of what the objective metrics are. And then even for some people too, maybe they don't expect to not feel well, but their criteria for what they consider good sleep subjectively is way more rigid than somebody who usually just sleeps well and doesn't think about it. So while maybe someone who has a bad night of sleep and is considered a good sleeper, they might have similar criteria subjectively to someone who is a reported poor sleeper. But when it comes to what they report as good sleep, the good sleepers will, not have that many metrics, where somebody who is a reported poor sleeper might have a much more stringent criteria for what they consider a good night of sleep subjectively. So we're starting to see that maybe this expectation effect is influencing how people feel, regardless of what the objective data says. So what does that maybe say? That maybe says that, for sure, it's probably a good idea to be working on, the objective metrics that we can improve around sleep hygiene to get a good night of sleep, not just for training and outcomes. Because there is, research showing that duration and quality of sleep are both important for body composition and recovery from training. But that, if you're all those metrics are both important for quality of life and how you perform day to day, that if you're doing a lot of things right, but maybe it's time to reevaluate psychology around your sleep, and that you don't want to nocebo yourself into waking up and having not feeling good. You want to try as much as you can to placebo yourself into having the best night of sleep you can. So when it comes to sleep, we start to see a trend here where, life's not going to be perfect. There's going to be tough periods. You might not always be able to stick to a perfect sleep hygiene routine. But the more you can try to train yourself to expect waking up feeling good, doing well, the more likely you are for that to be the case, regardless of what the objective data might say. Now, some people are probably more susceptible to these influences than others. If you're a fairly logic-based person, objective, and you got like maybe sleep trackers, my only caution there is, maybe use that data to find trends. Use that data to see what sleep hygiene metrics improve your objective metrics in comparison to also how you feel. Try to avoid as much as you can of, let's say you had a night of sleep and you wake up, you feel good. Well, avoid as much as you can to then look at your sleep tracker and then see maybe some of the objective measures aren't good, and then nocebo yourself into not feeling good that day. Right? We would want to avoid that as much as possible. There's definitely use for some of that objective data to maybe try to find trends to get the best quality of sleep, objectively speaking. But we want to avoid noceboing. So I thought that was an interesting starting point, that, the expectation effect around how we're going to sleep and how we feel as a result of our sleep, regardless of some of the objective measures, influences the results. And then, moving on, we can talk a little bit about nutrition. And so, there's a particular study I found interesting, and I will link it, where, there's a lot of talk, especially people who are trying to lose weight, or maybe they've lost weight and they're trying to maintain it. Hunger maintenance is always going to be a topic of discussion. Um, you know, if you're really hungry and you're struggling with satiety, it's going to be hard to stick to any nutritional plan. And when it comes to weight loss, we need to be able to stick to a caloric deficit for a long enough time to result in the weight loss. And then, once we lose that weight, we need to stick to whatever caloric range or pattern allows us to maintain within reason that weight loss. And so that really comes down to managing hunger and satiety. And so, of course, there's a lot of objective ways to do this that aren't based on the mind, and behavioral ways to do this. And that I'm not going to spend the time in this episode going over a lot of those factors. But what I found was that there is a psychology-based effect, a mindset. And so basically, to kind of discuss this in a little more detail, the researchers broadly, what they did is they kind of made some milkshakes. And so there's a common belief among a lot of people, and this may not apply to you, but a lot of people, that if they're going to have a more diet-based meal or snack that's lighter in calories, it may not be as filling, it may not sit with them as long, and so it may not, hold their hunger off as long. Where if somebody's going to have something more calorically dense, then they start to expect, if I'm going to have this really dense item, it's probably going to make me feel full and sit with me a long time. And so there's this common held belief. So the researchers kind of tested this. And so what they did is they made a milkshake. I'm sorry. They made a milkshake. And basically what happened is it was one milkshake that they labeled two different ways. One, they labeled it as kind of like a light drink, a diet drink. And the other one they labeled as a like an indulgent, really heavy caloric drink, but it's the same drink. And then they went ahead and measured, the metrics of ghrelin, and then also the psychology around hunger and satiety. And they found that that the ghrelin and hunger response was independent of the actual caloric intake, because it's the same shake. That when people had the light based drink, and then they had the expectation that diet type stuff doesn't sit with you as long, make you feel as full, they got their ghrelin came up sooner, was suppressed less, for less time. And then they also, reported that it wasn't as indulgent. And then the people, who had that same style of belief, but in the opposite for the indulgent shake, that they found that it suppressed their ghrelin longer. They weren't as hungry as soon. And they reported feeling more satiated for a longer period of time. But it's all the same drink. So this was independent of the actual caloric intake, the actual nutrient density composition of the drink. So we see maybe with diet as well. So we see it with sleep, that there's some effect of kind of expectancy. And then we also see this with nutrition, where there's some effect of expectancy. So if you're trying to diet, it's probably not a good idea to expect your meals that you plan to eat to be this won't hold me over. You might want to try to placebo yourself into thinking that, yeah, I'm going to enjoy this meal. It's going to taste pretty good. It's going to hold me over. It's going to be filling. Because then it's more likely to do so, regardless of just how voluminous or nutrient dense, or how much fiber or protein or fats or what have you, for objective metrics regarding things that influence satiety and hunger response are in the meal itself, which can help to make a diet more sustainable. And you could probably even extend this out to, if you're choosing a nutrition pattern and you go, man, I don't know if I can keep this up. Well, you probably, regardless if it is something that keeps you relatively full and is tasty, if you don't think you can keep it up, you're probably not going to be able to keep it up, right? So we can extend this outward to some degree. And so, and this goes for weight maintenance as well, that, you probably want to expect that, yeah, I can stick to, my weight maintenance goals, and the foods I'm going to eat after I diet are going to be okay. And because for most people, if you're going to lose a decent amount of weight, your caloric intake is going to come down unless you exercise more. because you're a smaller person. So, if you were a male, 220 pounds, and it took 3,000 calories to maintain that. If you go down to 170, it might be like 2,600 calories. It's the same general exercise routine than when you were like 220 to maintain that. So that's 400 less calories. Well, if you tell yourself, oh, well, there's no way I can be satiated long term on 400 less calories because I was, just satiated on 3,000 at 220, you're probably not going to do very well. But if you're able to go, well, you know what? No, it's going to be okay. I have new behaviors. I'm going to do well. I like the food I eat. I'm a lighter person. I don't need as many calories now. I'm going to be fine. I'm going to be satiated. It's going to be okay. You're more likely to succeed, regardless of the objective patterns that you may be taking on after that weight loss. So there's a psychology and expectancy component here too. And then, there's the training side of the equation, which is kind of, another area that I think is really important. Now, this one's a little bit more interesting, and I'll link some articles and discussions below. But, one of the areas of research I think is interesting is when, a lot of people know steroids and they know that they exist and they know that they objectively work. They do things in the body to make the training progress, build muscle, get stronger, all of that faster and easier. So what does that do then? That creates an expectancy among most trainees that if they're going to take steroids, they're going to get results. So some researchers decided to take advantage of that among some different high-level athletes who weren't taking steroids and then kind of tease them in a couple of lines of research saying like, hey, we're going to give you steroids, but they weren't steroids, they were placebo. And then they check to see what happens, right? Because if the people are expecting much better results than what they were getting from their natural natty training, then what's going to happen if they expect supernatural results? Are they going to get better results? Or is it going to, what's the expectancy effect? And so, they found that it seems like the part of reason steroids work aren't just objective reasons, they are subjective reasons as well. So, in one of the studies, they told people like, hey, if you improve the strength on these lifts, the people who the top people who improve the strength of these lifts over the next like X amount of weeks, we're going to give you steroids for another few weeks, and then we're going to see what your results are. So that incentivized the trainees to kind of train really hard to get the best. And so because they wanted to see like, if we put a fire under their butts and we incentivize these trainees to get the best results they can before we give them steroids, how much progress they make. And then if we give them placebo, how much progress do they make again? So you can almost compare those two. Because for anyone that's been training sometime, training comes in waves, right? So yeah, you should be always trying to strive for progress and taking it whenever it's available to maintain progressive overload. But there's certainly going to be periods, especially over a long training career, where you're probably going to be giving more of yourself to training than other periods, right? Is finals during exams as a student who also trains going to be the period in which you probably are putting a lot of eggs in your training basket to make the most progress? No, you're probably you should be trying to make progress, but it's probably not going to be the same fire. But if you had a low period at work, not a lot of stress, not a lot of vacations, you don't have exams if you're in school, and you got like a good 6 months, you got a lot of nutrition, food, and you got a big fire for training at that point, you're really motivated, you're probably going to make a lot more progress just because things are kind of lining up to push that way. So they were kind of trying to set that stage for these participants to compare what is a highly, what's that fire look like for results comparative to, the expectancy effect of steroids. And then they found that, of course, people made progress when they were pushing really hard because they were incentivized. And then when they gave them steroids, they made even more progress than they did when they were incentivized because they expected to make more results. So they were incentivized in a sense because it's well, if I'm going to take these drugs, I should probably take full advantage of them and train really, really hard. So it's they maintain that same level of effort from the portion of the study where they were trying to make the best progress to qualify. And then they expected even better results because of the steroids, which in this case were placebo. And then they made even more progress. So this kind of research almost explains a little bit that, well, what you expect to get from training to some degree is what you get. You know, I'm not oblivious to the fact that there might be something like a genetic ceiling, right? As somebody who's not willing to take a bunch of drugs and push all those envelopes, you know, there is a diminishing return. Do I think that there's like a defined ceiling? I'm not truly convinced that there is. I think we're dealing more so with long-term trainees of maybe more like time and lifestyle limits than true limits. Like the progress might be really, really slow, like almost like painfully slow, and it may take years and years, but could there still be objective progress over a long enough time scale? Yeah, but and this is for a separate podcast, but there is kind of a cost to benefit analysis that gets be done that can be done at a certain level of training where, you know, oh, you're a competitive powerlifter, you could put all in to add 10 pounds to your deadlift over the next 3 years, but what it takes to go all in at this point in your life might be hard because you might have other responsibilities like family and career and these other things going on. You might be getting older, and as you get older, you know, some of the natural aspects of aging make it harder. So, you know, okay, so maybe under an ideal circumstance, you could have added 10 pounds to your deadlift in 3 years, but because of lifestyle, it's 6 years, but that's also a time issue. So are you really going to make that 10 pounds of progress on that deadlift? It's kind of hard to say. So there's a little bit of conflicting effects because of how slow the progress is and how much needs to be right at that stage to make more progress, which again is another topic for another day. But I kind of wanted to just make sure that, you know, that there might be in the real world some points where certain aspects of life converge to where it's not quite feasible to make much more progress. But outside of that, just bearing that those real world limitations aren't there, we should try not to make that our focal point of progress of our mental processes, because the expectancy effect of our training makes a big difference. You know, based on some of these placebo steroid studies. I mean, there was another one that was pretty interesting where they took some pretty strong, like national ranked powerlifters, and you know, the coaches gave them fast acting steroids, and the lifters all made like immediate progress on their lifts. And then they told them they were going to keep giving it to them for like X amount of weeks. And then they let it go on. And then before they retested the athletes again, and the athletes over those weeks, they thought they were taking steroids, which were just placebo. They were lifting more weights, doing more reps. So objectively, their training performance across all that time was like higher. It wasn't just like, oh yeah, well, they thought they were doing well, so they had a heightened arousal state for this one day. So they hit like almost like competition, like very like unique maxes, and then the effect diminished regardless of what they thought. No, the training was more productive over all those weeks. And then they took half of them and they told half, hey, you were just taking placebo the whole time. And they told the other half, no, they were steroids. Now, again, they were all placebo. And when they retested them, the ones that they told were taking just placebo, a lot of those participants actually regressed to their training maxes prior to then thinking they even took the fast acting steroids. So even though the reality had set in for them at that exact moment that, wait, over those last X amount of weeks, I hit those maxes. They were me. They weren't a drug. I hit all those higher training numbers and all that training progress. That was me. But it's almost like because they didn't think that they were capable of that, it's almost like they went back to those pre-training states. And the ones that they let think that they were continuing to take steroids actually, you know, maintained all the progress. And so what does that tell us? Well, that tells you that, again, the expectancy effect is pretty huge. You know, if you expect to make really good results and to keep it, you're more likely to do so. So, you know, and then the last area in the training research I kind of want to talk about, it kind of echoes a little bit on this like genetic side. So, you know, there's maybe some talk now where people are talking about, oh, you should set realistic expectations. You should focus on like, well, do you have good genetics or not? And sure, maybe there's some argument, right? If you're really into bodybuilding, are you going to be a top level bodybuilder if you don't have the right parents? Are you into powerlifting? Are you going to be the top level powerlifter if you don't have the right parents? We can objectively say no, but unless you've been training, putting everything in, all in, with high expectancy of good results, and maybe realizing, oh man, after all this time, I'm not quite at that level. What purpose, at least at any point before that, does it serve you to have that expectation that you don't have good genetics? Well, based on some research, it's not. So they took, some people who were like runners, and then they told them like, oh, they tested their genes to see if they had some genes related to running performance that are pretty highly linked with outcomes in running performance. And they told group A, you have bad genes, and they told group B, you have good genes. But there was like a split. So not everybody in group A that they told had bad genes, and not everybody in the group that they told had good genes had good genes. But when they looked at the averages and everything that happened, those that they told had bad genes, regardless if they had bad genes, had worse results on average compared to those that had actual bad genes that they told had good genes. So, when you look at that, you start to see, wow. So, genetics matter, of course, at the highest echelons, they matter, but the expectancy matters a lot more until you're hitting those peaks. And maybe in some ways, we just don't know enough about genetics to know what areas matter the most. So really, like I said, in my personal opinion, unless you've been training for 10, 15 years, going all in. Now, when I say all in, everyone's definition of that is different. So people only know what's all in based on how in they've been to any one thing. But, we're talking like top 3 priority in life. You're prioritizing nutrition, sleep, training. You're prioritizing training groups, environment, your mindset. I mean, you're really putting everything into all these areas. And we're not just talking like, oh yeah, I got 2 good weeks of training, and the third week I went out on the weekend. It's like, no, you didn't go out for like 6 to 12 months. Like everything's dialed in for a long, long period of time. That's how I personally would define all in, because you need to really see where the results lie. And if you're doing all that over a long period of time and you're finding maybe you're not hitting those upper echelons, okay, maybe at that time you could take a more, quote unquote, objective look and be like, maybe I don't have those genetics. But I personally just don't think, based on some of the research, and even in genetics, what's the point? I think some of the genetic research is great when it comes to risk factors for different longevity effects, right? So you can try to mitigate those, cancers and stuff, which is not this type of podcast. But I think there is usefulness in the current genetic testing available. But I don't know if I would be using it right now to determine if I'm going to be a top tier athlete. I don't think we know enough about genetics to know what those factors are. And at worst, what you might see, you don't have some gene that the research says is important for some aspect of like fast twitch or something related to performance, and then nocebo yourself into not being the athlete you could be, because who knows what type of athlete you could be. So I'll link stuff again, like I said, below on these different topics for people who want to read more. But I thought it was worth kind of bringing it all together because it's under the umbrella of expectancy here. So when it comes to sleep and how we feel in our sleep quality, there's an expectancy effect. When it comes to our diet and how it's easy to maintain and what we get from that in terms of satiety and enjoyment, there's an expectancy. When it comes to training results and what we're capable of long term, there's an expectancy effect. And so to me, if you're going to do this thing with training, nutrition, and you're going to go for good results, your best default state is one that you expect that you have good genetics, you can make a lot of progress, you can stick to your diet's going to be enjoyable, and that, you're going to feel good each day, you're going to sleep well. You're better to just default into expecting good things on these fronts. And we could probably loosely apply this to other areas in life, but that's not my role to do that. But we could argue that could be a factor. So there's definitely objective things that go on, and I don't think that we should just blindly expect. I'm going to counter myself a little bit and just say, well, you don't want to also just blindly expect good things from whatever it is that you're doing. Always be open-minded, always follow objective measures, always look for something better for you. We're all a little bit different, and we're all at different stages in our life. So what worked for you 5 years ago may not work for the you that's today, because that's a different you and a different wear and tear and a different lifestyle and different things going on. So always be trying to explore and evolve. And when something no longer serves you objectively, if it's a dietary pattern, if it's a training style, if it's whatever it is, don't be afraid to try something new, but go into that new thing that you're choosing to do with expectations of good outcomes is really the kind of the key point here. So you always want to be expecting, trying to expect upfront good things, and then objectively measuring, and then moving forward from thing to thing, because you have to evolve as a lifter and somebody who's going to be doing this a long time, to make it a long time, and to find things that serve you for different periods, whether it's making progress, maintenance, etc. So, that's kind of like the topic I wanted to kind of review today. And I think it's important for a lot of people at any stage in training. And so, if you can't get yourself to reasonably expect good things from what you're doing right now, find something new. Find something you can get excited about. Find something you could put faith in. Is it a coach? Is it a new training program? Is it a new diet style? Is it, I don't know, new sleep hygiene, new sleep patterns? Whatever it is, if the current things you can't get yourself excited to expect good results, find something new, change it up, be confident in it. If you're a really logical person, my advice to you is take a little time, research, and find those ways to placebo yourself a little bit. It might seem weird, but there's even some lines of research showing that for some people, if they can placebo themselves, you almost worry. You're like, well, there's no way I could placebo myself. I can't. I'm too logical. I can't look at this training program and go, man, I'm going to say it's going to work, but I know I'm just saying that. Well, there's actually lines of research showing that people get results if they placebo themselves. So you can convince yourself a little bit that, hey, something good's going to happen, and you can take on mindsets of, wonder and curiosity to see, like, well, I wonder where this is going to take me. I wonder how much results I'm going to get, instead of just, maybe always taking a negative tone. So, a little addition there at the end. But I appreciate everybody for listening, and hope you all have a great day.
Thank you all for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave us a rating and review wherever you are listening, if you are listening to the audio-only version of this podcast. If on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe. Please let us know if you did or didn't like the episode, and all feedback is helpful. We will be releasing another episode 2 weeks from now. You can find us at Overcoming Resistance on YouTube and at Overcoming_Resistance on Instagram. Have a great day and take care.